There we go. So watch your language, everyone. You're being recorded. So in synopsis, because there are so many verses, 700 verses or more, according to one rabbinic commentary, about how to build the tabernacle, the holy furniture, how it was used, how it was carried, the Kohanim and all of their vestments, and how they were installed, etc. That it's so integral to portions of the Torah that I decided over the years to try to help everyone understand what it looked like and how it was assembled. And tonight we're going to try and take it to an even more in-depth level. So let's see what we can find. So the initial, again, many of you probably recognize the first 15 to 16 slides, which I've taught over the years. Let's see, there we go. So this is actually a real-time, life-size replica of the tabernacle. And it's at Timna Park, which is north of Eilat. It's out in the middle of the Arava in the desert. And the reason why it's so much fun to take tourists there is because you really get the sense out in the middle of this desert plateau what the tabernacle literally looked like in the desert. So what's really amazing is that they kind of made an amalgam of the 3 or 4 most famous rabbinic explanations of what the tabernacle looked like. What you can see here is there's this fence with guide wires that hold up the exterior courtyard. The interior, you have the huge altar. This is called the laver. This is where they sacrificed animals outside, obviously, because you can't barbecue inside. And this is the laver where the Kohanim would wash their hands and feet. This is the sanctum, known as the tabernacle tent of the meeting. It's also known as the Ohel Moed. Inside here, there are 2 rooms. The largest of the 2 rooms is called the Holies, and the smaller room in this on the north side here is known as the Holy of Holies. So what does it look like? In this famous colored wood carving from the 15th century. And again, you get a very good idea what the exterior courtyard looked like. And here you can see ancient, the concept is what they're trying to portray here. Ancient Israelites coming, sacrificing animals, the Kohanim performing rituals of placing the hands on the animal, the sacrificing on the outdoor altar, the Kohanim washing their hands, and again, inside here. By the way, the 12 tribes are encamped around the exterior, 3 on each side. That yields 12. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Let's get back. I apologize. Okay. Again, this is a more colorized idea of what it looked like conceptually. The difference between this one and the previous one is that we do know that the Kohanim used a ramp, even in the desert. There weren't stairs. And this is approximately 6 to 8 feet off the ground. And again, in the next slide, why does that keep happening? I apologize. Just close everything down. Can everyone see the simple rendering? Yes, you see it?
Yes.
Thumbs up? Okay, thank you, T. Let's see if I can do it without. Okay, yeah. So this is what the tent of the, there were textiles, a series of woven animal skins and wool and linen, and there were approximately 4 levels of textiles over the actual tabernacle itself. Getting a bird's eye view on the left, looking down, here was the bronze altar. I lovingly refer to it as the holy barbecue. The laver here is where the Kohanim would wash their hands. When you looked inside, if you could remove these coverings and look down, here you would see the 3 pieces of furniture in the holies. It is the table of showbreads, the menorah, and the altar of incense. Then there is a veil, here they call it a veil, which is a holy curtain. Behind the holy curtain is the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Holy Ark was. The tent inside, it was a gold box inside a wooden box inside a gold box. Frequently, it's sort of like one of those Russian dolls. Inside it was the 10 Commandments, the broken 10 Commandments, a jar of manna, and upon Moshe's death, they also placed a Torah that he wrote inside the ark. This is a better rendering of what it looked like. Here you can see the Kohen Gadol in full regalia. Here is one of the exterior curtain that he would pass through. Here you can see a rendering of the table of showbreads, the menorah, an altar here where he would burn incense, another curtain. And behind that curtain, you have the ark. But the reason why I particularly like this rendering is because you can see, and I'm going to show you in a moment, how the walls were assembled in the desert without a foundation using like children's Lego type technology. It's very interesting the way he did it, and it produced an extremely stable structure. Again, an outer rendering, an artistic rendering. The only thing missing here is the ramp. Here you can see the laver, and here you can see what the tent of the meeting looked like. Again, just yet another rendering of what artist's depiction of what it was like in the desert. Here, though, you can see the Levites assembling the walls of the exterior. I mentioned that around the tabernacle, so this brown area represents the three tribes of Levites, the Gergeshites, the Kohites. I'm sorry, I keep on getting text. Let me just turn this off. It's from that young girl who's under stress. Hope that wasn't too disturbing. And then here you have the 12 tribes, 3 on each side. So the Levi tribes were the Kohites, the Girgashites, and the Merarites. And here you have the 3 sons of Levi, the 3 sub-clans. Okay, and then again, obviously, the reason why we emphasize this particular rendering is because it shows you that the center of town, so to speak, where everyone had their focal intellect is towards the center of the people, which is the tabernacle. We were always emphasized that the very essence of our community was the tabernacle. You know, what's the saying? All eyes turn to the tabernacle, right? Okay, so let's take the next. These are the holy furniture. Yes, please. I love questions. Give it to me. Where are we? Who shouted out?
Alva,
Yes.
what would you estimate, or are they telling us about how long it would take to put it together or to break up, and how often they would have to do it?
So we traveled 42 times in 40 years. Some of those stops were as long as a year. Other stops were only a number of days. Regardless of how long, we didn't know when we pitched camp, we didn't know how long we were going to be there. When the pillar of fire moved, the Levites would break camp and pack everything up. During the day it was a pillar, during the day it was a pillar of cloud, and at night it was a pillar of fire. It was up to God. Now, you got to remember, there are 22,700 Levites. They could get the job done. How long? That much I don't know. That's a very good question. I suspect it can be done fast.
Yeah, 22,000, yes, for sure.
Yep.
Each one block.
Right. So this is the ark. Now I'm going to give you a heads up. No artistic rendering is going to be accepted by all rabbinic commentaries. So for example, the classic rendering of the Holy Ark would have these staves, these wood poles much higher. But I like this particular rendering because the rest of the holy furniture is consistent with tradition. Now, I'm going to show you that the table of showbread, this is definitively not according to the Talmudic explanations of the table of showbread, and I will show it to you in a few minutes. This is known as the inner altar of spices, of incense. The menorah, which stood approximately 7 feet tall, and again, I'm going to show you pictures of it. The copper basin or the laver, and this is the outside, the when I teach bar mitzvah kids, the holy barbecue. It's the altar where they sacrifice animals. I like this particular rendering because if you look inside the altar, can you see there's like meshwork? The metal is like latticed, and it makes perfect sense because they would put first wood. The wood would catch fire. The ashes would filter down through those holes, and all they would have to do is constantly put more wood on the to make the fire, and obviously the animals would go on top. So the idea is I like that very much because it shows accurately, according to the Talmud, what the altar looked like. This is one of the classic depictions of what the ark looked like. And again, you have to remember a lot of this is artistic license. For example, this framework, nowhere in the Talmud and the Torah does it make reference to this framework on the sides. But the cherubs or the cherubim, one male, one female, and their wings almost touching. God's voice came from here, where the wings almost touched. There's a beautiful midrash in the Talmud that says when the children of Israel loved one another, the angels faced one another. When the children of Israel were sinning and were not acting properly, the angels turned 90 degrees and faced away from each other. And at every holiday, I'm confident that I have the Talmudic page. I'm going to show it to you. Every Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the Kohanim would pull back the curtain so that everyone in the Azara, everyone in the courtyard, could see into the ark, and they'd get an obvious message. Are they behaving? Then the children angels are facing each other. Are the Israelites sinning and not loving one another? They would know right away there was a time to do some teshuvah, repentance. So I discussed earlier that, Rigel, you have a question?
Yeah, about the cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. I
Yes.
read somewhere that in the Babylonian Talmud, this was the angel Metatron. Could you is that true, or is this actually God?
So there's, I remember reading that. There's according to tradition, there are 4 levels of reading a verse. In fact, there's a very famous story that 4 rabbis went into the orchard, nichnasu lepardes, and
Oh,
allegorically.
is this a don't say the water thing?
So no, but allegorically, the orchard or the Garden of Eden is deep mystical teaching. One of them went crazy. They were studying Kabbalah. One went crazy. One went. One became a heretic. One died immediately, and only Rabbi Akiva nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom. Only Rabbi Akiva went in peace, complete, and exited in peace. So, what does this have to do with your question? The answer is pardes, which means paradise. It's where the origin of the word paradise, pardes, is an abbreviation. Pershat, Remez, Drash, and Sod, which means the pshat, the literal meaning of a verse. Remez, what the verse is hinting to. Drash, which means like something you can figure out an interesting like nuance if you are logical and rational. And then the 4th level is sod, which means that which is secret. So the question is, was Metrodon the fire? It's an interesting discussion. It is.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
that's a
understand.
very deep level of looking. Now, one of the things I hope to show you tonight is that everything that we're learning here is still allegorical. Even though it's 2,000 years since we've had a temple, I'll show you, hopefully we'll be able to get to it by the end of the evening, how this all, even though what we're reading now, I'm about to show you, is 3,000 years old, our tradition about it, and the last time that this was used was 2,000 years ago, it can still be very important to our lives today. So, I don't want to read it, but on the bottom, you could see a more accurate rendering of what on the bottom left in the white, a more accurate rendering of what the table of showbreads most probably looked like. Because 6 on one side, 6 on the other, which represented the 12 tribes. And what you see here, what these Kohanim are carrying, those are the actual loaves of bread. That's what they looked like a very thick tortilla, like that came up on the sides. Now, there is a yeshiva in Jerusalem called Ateret Kohanim, and the Kohanim, you have to be a Kohen to study in the yeshiva, and all they study are the laws and the traditions and the minutia of this law. if you want, I'll get pictures of the Kohanim practicing baking these style breads today in 2024. Every semester, the young Kohanim come in and they learn how to bake breads just like this, based on the Talmud. At the end of the week, the bread was miraculously just as fresh. It was replaced with 12 loaves, and the mishmar, that team of Kohanim that worked in the sanctuary that week, they all shared in the loaves of bread. So when you read in the Torah portion about the table of the showbreads, now you know what it looked like. And here you can see the rings that which the staves pass through. This is the famous menorah. On the left, you have, I'm sure you've seen it. This is Maimonides has it on straight angles. This is the menorah that Chabad uses till today. They abide by the tradition that the menorah was at angles, sharp angles, rather than what's on the right, which is the curved menorah that we are more familiar with. The reason why a majority of the world holds by the right and not on the left is because...
Rabbi, you need to change the slide.
Why?
Because the one that we're seeing right now is not the menorah, it's about the showbread.
How come you don't?
Ahuva, what do you see?
The menorah, I have the sharp.
Oh, wow.
I see the menorah.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Michael, maybe your computer's just, maybe your internet's a little
A little slow.
achy.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happens is the reason why majority of the world abides by the menorah picture on the right is because the Arch of Titus, which is in Rome, was built by Titus after he destroyed the temple, and has a very famous relief of the Jews carrying this menorah into Rome as part of the spoils. So archaeologically, so to speak, historically, this rendering on the right is more accurate. Now, if you study about Hanukkah, about the cruse of oil, this is, you can see here, the Kohen. It was solid gold beaten out of one piece of gold ingot. And you can see the Kohen, it was so tall, approximately 8 feet tall, 7 to 8 feet tall, that the Kohen had to go up a series of steps and fill the oil cups every single evening, and they would burn a tamid 24 hours. I like this rendering on the right because in Parshat Bahalotcha, it literally says that the wicks have to be pointed at an angle towards the center. And in this particular rendering, it's very easy to see that. On the left rendering, also accurate, but instead of them angled, they have like I Dream of Genie lamps, and they just have the wicks towards the center. On the bottom here in the middle, this is actually a menorah that is on display in the old city of Jerusalem. When this picture was taken, this particular menorah was in the cardo. Cardo comes from the same Latin word as cardiac, meaning heart, in the heart of the old city. That's 2,000 years old. It has now been moved, and it's on the descending stairs on a platform. When you descend from the Jewish quarter to the Western Wall, that's where you can see this life-size. We wish it was made out of gold. It's made out of wood that's painted gold. Here, this is again what the laver looked like. We believe that the initial laver was just a huge cistern. On the right, on the top right, we know that this was the second level of the creation of the laver. If you look closely, you can see the original laver on the bottom, but then this lid was added to it so that you could add more water, because our population increased. Kohanim needed to be washing all day long. These apparent faucets were added, and the Gemara actually talks about them. And on the last picture on the bottom is that one of the Kohanim was a brilliant engineer, and we're going to show it to you in a minute, and he devised a method that using a chain and a pulley system, they were able to lift the entire device up and lower it into a well that was on the Temple Mount, and then it would fill up with water, and then they would lift the entire device up and put it down on the ground. In fact, if you look to the right here, where I'm moving my cursor, do you see like a blue opening? That was a well that the Kohanim would. Now, if you know anything about the weight of water, water weighs approximately 8 pounds per gallon. The cistern held approximately, I think it was 400 gallons. If you do the math, this was an engineering feat. It wasn't like unheard of, it was just significant. This is how the walls of the tabernacle were assembled. And remember, I told you when I teach it to young people, I use the term Legos. So if you look here on the left, you can absolutely see the childhood building mechanism known as Legos. They snapped into each other. They snapped into these forms that gave it structure on the bottom. And then these additional poles were run through the top, the middle, and the bottom. And there was an additional pole, according to most rabbis, that went through the interior of every board. I'll show that to you as well. And here you can see where the boards were snapped down into the, I hope I'm not going to get excommunicated for calling it Lego, but you can literally see how the boards snapped down and that they then were, here, you can see a pole that goes through the middle and then the exterior pole there. And on the right, again, you can see the significant methodology that stabilized each board. Again, just different renderings. What is interesting, if you look here, let's call this the foundation base, the vadim, and you can see that one peg went into one and the other peg went into its twin. So they weren't in the same box, so to speak. They were in different boxes, which further stabilized it. And again, here, different rendering of the same concept of what each one looked like. And again, you can see that this box would go on to the far left, and the board on the on its left would go into it on the right. More renderings of what it looked like, you get the idea. This is what the ramp looked like outside during the temple time. This is a rendering of the second temple. Solomon's temple was not as extensive, but you can see here that the ramp was approximately 6 feet high. So what's interesting about that is that, again, here you can see some device. This is one rendering of how the Kohanim would lower this into the well and lift it up, and there'd be plenty of water. Here you can see where the wood would be placed and stored. This is the ashes, and this is where there are very complicated rituals. And here you can see a Kohen walking the perimeter. There's actually 2 different levels. This level where he would walk and put blood on each corner or on the walls. And another alternative is where he's walking now. Again, rituals that had to do with how to place the wine libations, the blood, there had to be spritzing of blood, very complicated. Here you can see the ramp. There were no stairs leading up to the altar. And here's where the ashes were deposited, because every day there'd be hundreds of pounds of ashes, depending on not just the daily sacrifices, but the sin offerings, the guilt offerings, the Thanksgiving offering. That was not a constant. The daily offerings, morning, afternoon, and evening, those were constant. That was the minimum. But depending on how many people, maybe it was a good day, nobody sinned. Maybe it was a good day, nobody accidentally ate treif. So the guilt offerings, the sin offerings, and the Thanksgiving, maybe it was not a good day, nobody gave birth, so nobody came with a Thanksgiving offering. So again, here you can see a better rendering of what we were talking about. This is from the Temple Institute. It's similar to a Teret Kohanim, but anyone can study in this yeshiva. And here you can see the Kohen taking the coals and ashes off of the altar and placing them in this underground cistern. They could not just be thrown away. It was equivalent of a ritual burying because they were somewhat holy. They were the ashes from sacrifices. And here you can see the device, one rendering of what the device looked like, that would lower it into the cistern. Here you can see, again, from an alternative view, And here you can see the Kohen up on the altar itself doing a ritual with different parts of the animal. These are forks. You got to remember, some animals, let's say, for example, you're slaughtering a cow or an ox. An ox weighs 1,000 pounds. So you eviscerate it, you remove the hide. It still weighs 400 or 500 pounds without certain organs. So you needed very strong Kohanim and utensils to remove the meat, to turn the meat, etc. Here you can see the Kohanim washing their hands and feet. As you notice, all Kohanim are barefoot, as we discussed last week in the Shabbat Parsha. This is a rendering again from the Temple Institute of what they made a replica of the kior of the laver. Again, here you can see this is the altar. It was placed approximately, this has it much higher, this has it closer to 8 feet tall. The sides and this empty box is just like three sides attached to the ramp. And as you burnt animals, this would fill up with ashes that would later be opened and removed. It was actually a ritual called Trumat HaDeshen, where the different Kohanim had to they were appointed to remove the ashes, because if you don't remove the ashes, it will build up and you have problems with getting oxygen into the fire. And again, in these pictures, you can see the horns. When you're going to be reading the Torah portion every Shabbat, you're going to make references to the horns of the altar. And these renderings, they literally made them look like cow horns or ox horns. On the Talmud, they really didn't do it. They were just elevated. And calling it an ox horn, sacrificing the whole concept of the golden calf, most of the rabbis agreed that they weren't literally horns. But anthropomorphically, we even, don't you call it a foot of a chair, right? It doesn't look like a foot, but they called it the horn because it was a protrusion on each corner. Here is a famous ritual that was daily. Again, this is the inner room called the Holies. And every day the Kohen would take a pan, like a shovel, bring coals, hot burning coals from the outdoor altar where they were burning animals, take the coals, place them on this altar, and then using his hands, he would lower incense onto the fire and it would spark up. And the smell was very, very pleasant. Now, there were 11 ingredients, and the ingredients, although we know them, which were the 11, it's written in the Torah, the amounts were never specified. And there was a famous Kohen family called Abitas that was in charge of it. And they kept it like they call it like an industry secret. And their incense burnt the best. And there once was in the Talmud a disagreement between the Kohen Gadol and this family. They said, fine, you don't want to pay us what we're worth? Then good, go make your own. So the Kohen Gadol the high priest arranged for another group of Kohanim to make it. And it was just so inferior that they had to go back to that family, that Abitas family, and pay the price of the perfect incense. In the background, you can see the arms of the menorah. Behind him to the right would be the table of the showbreads. Here again is a famous wood carving from, I believe it's the 15th century. And again, this would be in the room of the holies. Now, one of the things we're going to do next Tuesday night, by the way, next Tuesday night in Temple Menorah, come to Temple Menorah, it's movie night. We're showing a comedy called The Frisco Kid. It's a comedy. And one of the things we're going to discuss is Mel Brooks, was behind the movie. It's very funny. There's a lot of Jews in it. There's some things that are absolutely accurate, and there are other things that are absolutely poetic license and not really true. So, for example, although we love this wood carving, look here. This is his breastplate. What? There's only 8 stones. Everyone, look at the Bible. It says 12 stones representing the 12 tribes. So we know that, certain parts of it are good and certain parts of it aren't good. I like this particular one because it shows the altar without true horns, but just protrusions. For approximately 370 years, after we entered into the land of Israel, we didn't build the temple yet. Solomon was going to build the temple. And from Joshua until Solomon is approximately 450 years, depending on 370 years, regardless. So the tabernacle went through semi-permanent status in different towns. One was Nov, one was Shiloh, temporary, that lasted a number of years until it was eventually brought to Jerusalem. And here again, it's just a Jewish a source book from the 1990s that would show, as you can see, it didn't blow up well. But the idea was, teaching, Jewish day school kids what it looked like. And again, here is the same exact tabernacle, but the concept is here. It's a rendering of what it looked like in Shiloh, with walls that are more permanent. And again, here is the ramp leading out to the outdoor altar. You can't see the laver, it's being blocked. But here you see them dragging water for the Kohen's laver. This is what Solomon's temple most probably looked like. These columns, by the way, had names, Boaz and Yachin. Why? Because some guy named Boaz and some guy called Yachin paid for them. Just joking. Is anyone laughing? Okay, I see a few of you laughing. All right, good. By the way, I got to tell you something. So when you go to one of the most ancient synagogues in the Golan, it's in Katzrin, and the synagogue is like 2,300 years old. So that means it was actually in use while the temple was in use for a couple hundred years. Because not everyone, the Golan back then, going from the Golan to Jerusalem was maybe like a 2-day hard travel, but people had to pray every day. So there was a synagogue in the Golan called Katzrin, and there were 2 pillars that led into the sanctuary, so to speak. And on the bottom of each pillar, there was a rectangle, an empty rectangular that was scratched in and carved into the pillar, and nobody knew what it was until about 20 years later. They came and they wanted to turn my nephew was married in the synagogue at night, in this ancient synagogue, but they had to bring in electricity. So they came with depth finders and sonic devices to find out, where they can run the electrical cables. And something started pinging, and they dug it up, and guess what they found? Ancient dedication plaques. This column was dedicated by Elliot Pearlson in memory, and it was 2,200 years old. So, hey, nothing new under the sun, right? Okay, let's get back. Okay. This is just a very complicated rendering of what the temple looked like during Solomon's time. You got to remember, Solomon was a billionaire, and he increased it. He made an additional 10 menorahs. He made 10 lavers. He was the one who built the 2 pillars, and that's right out of the Book of Kings. So the question is, why did he do it? Well, it wasn't forbidden, and more importantly, they definitely need lavers. Why? Because the population went from 600,000 to probably at least 2 million over the next, the following 400 or 500 years. And the Kohanim, you can't keep them waiting in line. They have to wash their hands. This is again from the time of King Solomon. And remember what I told you, no artistic rendering is going to be perfect. The problem with this one is there's stairs. And we know for a fact we're never stairs. But why did I put this here? Because here you can see the 2 different ramps, so to speak. Let's make believe they're ramps because that's what they should be. And you can see that there's a ledge that the Kohanim would have to walk about the altar depending on what the ritual's demands were. Sometimes, you sprinkled the blood on this horn. Sometimes it was on the opposite horn. Sometimes you went left to right, right to left, up and down, circle around, do-si-do. You put your right hand in, you put your right hand out, turn yourself about. Okay. Here you can see the laver and how lavishly Solomon enhanced it. It was known as the Yam, which means the sea. It was approximately 15,000 gallons. Now that means it was the size of a pool, like a pool today. Think of the engineering necessary to keep it that far up off the ground. Now, in addition to that, these renderings of the additional 10 lavers are very accurate according to the Talmud, that they were on wheels and they could be wheeled about. They were very efficient. Again, more renderings of the molten sea, the Yamutsak. Okay, just give you an idea what it looked like. These are the portable lavers that King Solomon made. Here's another rendering that's kind of important because I'm introducing you now to the tables and the hooks and the pilings. That here's the ramp leading up. Here's the ash pile in the middle. These are the horns on each corner. This is actually where the offering fire was. And here's where they kept piles of wood. And here was the incense fire, where the Kohen would take the coals and bring it down. Now, what were these tables for? Well, do you ever walk into a Goldstein's kosher butcher shop? You gotta eviscerate the animals. You have to, these stanchions, how they held the animal down so it wouldn't kick and flail while the actual slaughtering is, because if they move and you cut it the wrong way, it invalidates the offering. So this is all based on the Talmud, what it looked like. This is the famous high holiday ritual where the Kohen would bring this pan full of hot coals. He's wearing pure white. He would put the incense on the coals and the smoke would emanate up. And here's the famous rendering on the right where, and God spoke to the children of Israel from between the wings of the cherubs, the male and female child angels. Now, I want you to remember this because this is very important as we get closer to how this all relates to us in our generations, 2,000 years after the destruction of the temple. The only thing that's inaccurate about the picture on the left is, does anyone know? The Kohen is missing something. Some say it was tied around his waist, and other people say it was tied around his foot. Does anyone know? There was a rope. Oh, yeah, Ahova's mentioning. If the Kohen made any mistake while he was in the Holy of Holies, he died. If he screwed up, he was lazy or lackadaisical, or he made an act of omission or commission, he died. Now, the only one allowed in is the Kohen Gadol. So how did they get him out? Nobody could go in and get him. So he had to tie a rope around himself. So in case he screwed up, they'd be able to pull his body out. So it's just a footnote. Again, looking in the opposite direction, you can see the ramp, the altar, and here I like it because the horns are not depicted as actual horns. You can see the various ledges that the Kohanim would walk around. And here you can see the tables and the stanchions and the hooks, and here you can see the laver on your left where the Kohanim would wash their hands and feet. Just more complicated rendering of what the temple looked like. This is here you have the 60 different parts. Yes, it's in Italian because Rabino Menachem Brod is Italian, but I liked it because it detailed the 60 different parts of the ancient tabernacle, which now is rendered here as the Holy Temple. These are it should be Beit HaMitbachim. Mitbach in modern Hebrew is kitchen. So this is the slaughter area where they did the cutting and the prepping. They held the animals down during the slaughtering. Here you can see where different eviscerated parts of the animal would be hung so that they could be checked to make sure the animal was kosher. Now, here's a very interesting thing. This is, colloquially, holy, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Remember when you were kids and you wanted to pick someone, everyone would stand in a circle and you the kid would go to everyone's toe or to your hand. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. My mother told me to pick the very best one, and it is you. It's like children play. They still do. So this is actually holy, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. What happens is there are 24 mishmarot, teams of Kohanim, and approximately 2 times a year, they got a chance to run everything. Each team would get a chance twice a year to run everything in the Holy Temple for 1 week, running the daily rituals. 4 times a day, there was a lottery to determine which member of that team would do the different parts of the daily rituals. So the Kohen Gadol, this guy here, would take a piece of paper, or right, and he would write down a number, any number he wanted. Let's say a number, we don't know if it was 1 to 100. Well, let me rephrase that. It might have had an upper and a lower. We don't know. But let me rephrase that. I don't know. I haven't learned that yet. So what happens is, let's say he chose a number 62. So all the Kohanim that were eligible to work that particular ritual would stand in a circle around him. He chose a number 62. And what happens is everyone can hold up a hand, and you held up the number of fingers, any number, 1 or 5 or 3, any number you wanted. And the Kohen, that day, the number was 62. So he would go 2 and 3 is 5, is 6, is 9, is 11. He would add it up and go all the way around. Then they would do it again and all the way. They didn't know what the number was, and they did not know what the other person's fingers were going to be up. And when you go around in the circle and hit the number 62, that was the Kohen who would do that ritual. It was a lottery. And the idea was it was out of the Kohen Gadol's hands. He didn't get a choice. He wrote it down. There's no way to go around it. There's no way to fudge it. There's no way to stack the deck. And it was mazel. It was basically fate. What God wanted that day is the person that officiated at that ritual. From what I understand, if you already officiated at one ritual, you couldn't re-enter any other additional rituals of the day. So the idea was that every Kohen had a chance to do something by the end of the day. Here again, you can see the types of work that had to be done. We know, by the way, if you ever looked at the rendering of the Arch of Titus, you'll see that one of the things that are being held up in the air are these incense pans, these frying pans, that the coals would be carried. Next time I'll try my best. I should have snuck it in here from the Arch of Titus, that you'll see us carrying the menorah on our backs, and that these silver and copper and brass implements were also ushered in through the Arch of Titus. Here you can see the Kohanim eviscerating the various animals. Here again, you can see that the Kohen is bringing forth the hot coals down the ramp, because it will be used in various rituals. Here you see a Kohen going up the ramp with that giant pitchfork, so to speak, so that he can do the proper rendering of the meats, because they weighed hundreds of pounds. Here again, just a different view of the same thing.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what's the differences in the different jobs between the Levites and the Kohanim? If you say the Kohanim did all this, then what did the Levites do?
But the Levites had plenty to do. For example, they did the accompaniments. They did schlepping a lot of the water. Kohanim didn't do so much of the water, but they're also, you got to remember that a Kohen has to remain ritually pure during all of this. He can't come in contact with the dead, or anyone who has come in contact with the dead, or even a dead animal like a dead rat. You got to remember, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of eviscerated animals, so there could be rats and who knows what. So the Kohen had to be very careful. By the way, Josephus discusses how immaculate the Temple Mount was, considering
The blood.
Listen, have you ever been in a slaughterhouse? I'm going to tell you, it's not just the blood. You know what happens when you slaughter an animal? What happens with the intestines? I mean, it's a dirty job, okay? So the whole idea is, Josephus mentions how remarkably immaculate the Temple Mount was. Now, that being said, you asked what the Levites did. There was plenty of things to do. Water, cutting of the trees, bringing them, stacking them in the various, there were different Heichal were like special rooms in the various courtyards. Heichal Gasid, Heichal Haitzim, Heichal HaKetoret. These are different chambers where the incense was kept, where the wood was kept, and I have actually a couple of pictures of them. So you'll get the idea. And we're not even up to where I wanted to get you, but we're doing great. So this was known as the Chamber of the Lambs. Now you got to remember, daily lambs had to be slaughtered, the Karban Tamid, the daily offering. There's twice, one in the morning, one in the evening. Now, they were kept up there. That means somebody had to water them, someone had to feed them, someone had to clean up their stalls. It was a dirty mess. Now, they had to be kept um, and for 4 days before being offered to make sure, see what this Cohen is doing? He's examining the most famous parts of a sheep that become ripped or diseased, make sure that the animal is tam, which means perfect. That when you slaughter the animal, it can't be, it's like when I was a young rabbi, my salary was very challenging. And Judy would always get me these really beautiful shirts. She would buy them at Marshall. Maybe you've heard of the name brand. They were called Irregular. Is anyone laughing? So irregular shirts, like, I'm not going to tell you that one collar was longer than the other. No, but like it would be missing a button. So we'd sew on a button, instead of paying $30 for a shirt, we pay $18.99. We were young. We had kids. We were paying $12,000 a year for a Jewish day school. So the whole idea is that you couldn't have an irregular animal. Nothing. It had to have, like, if I can continue with that analogy, it had to have every button properly sewn. Everything had to be perfect. And for 4 days, the Kohanim would examine the animals. Here's, those hooks I was telling you about, that the animal would be placed in this, in English, it's called a stanchion. If you go to a butchery or a slaughterhouse, they're called stanchions. And depending on and one Kohen would ensure that the animal is relaxed and calm and laying down. And by the way, if you don't think that they lay down and they're calm, have you ever seen how they would brand cows? Once you get them over here tipping a cow, once you have them on the floor, they're quiet. And that's how the slaughtering would be done. This is the table of Lechem Hapanim, the chamber of the showbread. And again, Kohanim had a lot of work to do. The wheat had to be sifted. The wheat had to be checked for bugs. The wheat had to be ground. The wheat had to be the flour had to be kneaded and baked. It was very complex, and you can see that in this huge chamber, many of the Kohanim would be busy working, not just the oven man. Now, what you have here is, remember we were discussing this is one of the Mishmar, one of the teams that's bringing in the bread, the showbreads, along with the daily sacrifices, Shnei Kfasim B'nei Shanat Mimim, which literally means 2 lambs less than a year old daily for the offering. Here you can see what's called, does everyone know that meal is actually an Old English term for flour, like cornmeal, oatmeal. So this was known as the meal offering, even though it was made out, for some reason, we don't call wheat meal anymore, we call it flour. But other grains, for some reason, it is called, referred to. Here you have the oil for these different rituals. What I thought was amazing is that this rendering, I don't know why, I'm going to annotate it. I don't know why, but whoever the artist found it necessary to depict this Kohen Gadol with an iPhone.
Rabbi, I said the exact same thing to Mort. He's looking at his iPhone.
Why is this guy taking a picture of the Kohanim? All right, I have a confession to make. I really do not know what it is, but I thought it'd be funny.
And he's checking how sharp it is.
Say that again.
Might be a knife, and he's checking how sharp it is.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. In his right hand is the handle, but you know what threw me?
Axe kind of a thing than a knife shape,
Yeah. What happens is the knives that we do use till today are exceptionally longer. So I guess actually I've never seen the ritual slaughtering knife for a sheep. I've only seen the ones for large animals, like for cows, and it's exceptionally large. Clear ultrons. There we go. Yes. Oh, by the way. Oh, wait. I'm so embarrassed. So what happens is when even today, this is obviously not a knife, but when a shochet is preparing to slaughter an animal, I know that Yemenite shochtim still do it to today. They have a long pinky nail. Have you ever seen that? Ahuva has seen it. Ahuva's lived in Israel.
Yeah,
Yemenite
I've seen it with
ritual,
my father. My father used to do it himself before when having
right?
baby and this.
So the tradition was that you grew your pinky fingernail really long. And what happens is you would run your pinky down. Oh my gosh, I wish you guys could see this. You run your pinky down the blade. And if there's any imperfections in the blade, you feel the vibration in your finger and like right there. Did you see it stop? There, it stopped again. I mean, this is good for cutting, cutting paper. There's a whole bunch of them. So the whole idea is that's what the shochet has to do. And that's the benefit of having a really long nail is that you could run it down, feel the vibrations of inconsistencies. And if there are any, you have to stop what you're doing. You cannot slaughter the animal. You have to re-hone your blade. So I hope that everyone understands that I'm showing you this because for the last 3 weeks and for the next 3 weeks, we're going to get more and more and more of this. Yes, Mort, I think your hand is up. Yes.
Question. Could you put this in context for me? This is 10th century BCE.
Up until 70 CE, up until the destruction, up to Masada.
Okay, and then when we were in Israel, we saw excavations where there were other temples, smaller scale, that were
Nablus, Shechem, like in Shechem,
yeah,
Gezer. Let me think where are the other ones. Tel Dan.
No, Shechem.
so smaller scale.
Right. Now
But
that's because
they then covered them with dirt.
Right.
We were told because they
Outlawed it.
outlawed them.
right. So what happened was you were allowed to ritually bring certain sacrifices before the building of the Holy Temple. And you could also not bring, because there were, not every community had a Kohen, not every community had a Levi, but more so, it wasn't Jerusalem. So there were certain things you were allowed to do and certain things you weren't allowed to do on an altar until the building of the temple. So they built the temple and people kept on doing that. So what happened was I definitely by Ezra and Nehemiah's time that it was forbidden, okay, because they were decentralizing Jerusalem. For example, Zoom is decentralizing, Zoom minions are decentralizing the synagogue. It used to be that every morning and every evening, everyone had to go to shul. And it maintained the central, movement of the community always facing towards your synagogue. Now, Zoom, Mincha Mariv, don't get me wrong, tonight we had like 17 people praying. That's great. But the idea is if you have kosher, acceptable altars all over Israel, why should I schlep and have to worry about traffic and parking? I'll Zoom minion. So that's why they outlawed it, to maintain that Jerusalem would remain the focal point for all ritual. Okay?
Rabbi, it's definitely a special, that's the knife, that's the knife
Yeah.
for slaughtering I actually Googled it and they use it until today. I don't know if you can see it.
Right, so that's the one I know, which is
It's the wine
significantly
one.
longer.
A little bit
It's
longer now, but it's also a
significantly
wine
longer,
one,
right. But
for-
it's definitely rectangular.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's either that or an iPhone. All right, so the next one, again, here you can see, so that you can just visualize the concept of how they brought in the hot coals and that the incense was placed on the hot coals and it caused it to spire upward. This is a great rendering of the Kohen walking up the stairs using the cruse of oil to fill the menorah and how the lights are always facing towards the center, oriented towards the center. This was the Chamber of Vessels, Heichal HaKilim, and there were 93 sacred vessels used every single day. Silver, gold, bronze, brass, copper, etc. And they had to be cleaned, they had to be maintained. It was a tremendous amount of work. By the way, if you look here, you see this? This is most probably an oil vessel, and there are tens of thousands of them found throughout Israel. And when you go to the Israel Museum, you see them even with this cast iron or base and foundation. Does anyone know why they're not flat? Why they come to a point? Does anyone know? I'll give you a hint. It's also on the
Because
bottom
sediment.
of wine bottles.
Because of sediment. You want the sediment
Exactly.
to fall.
Right, exactly. So that when you tip the jug to pour it, the sediment stays, the weight compacts it down. There's less chance of you getting any sediment in the wine. And just again, you can see that the Kohanim, they were always busy. It's sort of like firefighters. If you've ever gone to a fire station, how often do they get called on a fire? Here in Miami Beach, it's like something like only 40 times a year, but there are 5 fire stations. So what do they do all day? They do plenty. They have to maintain their tools. They have to train. They have to constantly check the fire hoses to make sure they aren't rot, et cetera, et cetera. They work all day long. You don't think they do. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, maybe you know the story. Person calls the rabbi up and says, Rabbi, my son thinks he wants to become a rabbi. Can he follow you around? Can he shadow you so he can see what your life is like like a rabbi? It's like people say, what does the Kohen do all day? So what does the rabbi do all day? So the kid comes in and sits with the rabbi and goes, okay, day starts right now with Shacharit, 8 o'clock in the morning. We're going to go in for a minyan. He goes, okay, I understand. Minyan's at 8 o'clock and minyan's at 6 o'clock at night. But the rest of the day, what the hell do you do, Rabbi? And the rabbi turns to him and says, you don't want to be the rabbi. You want to be the president of the shul. Get it? Like, what do you do all day, Rabbi? So what do the Kohanim do? There's a lot of work. Let's see, someone has their hand up. Hi, Rabbi. Some have speculated that the design of the menorah was inspired by nature as it resembles a type of sage plant, a Jerusalem salvia plant that grows in the region. So there is definitely, and there's a tremendous amount of Jewish mysticism that refers to it as a tree. Absolutely. The trunk, the arms, and the roots are the foundation. Absolutely. It's one of the motivations that Rambam says that they're more at an angle because the tree never really rounds it. Nature doesn't really grow in that particular way. So let's get back to
Rabbi, I have a stupid question.
sure.
So did the Kohanim ever eat fruits and vegetables? I mean, basically it's meat and bread with
Oh
some
yeah. No. You got to remember, truma was that you had to give 10% of everything. A truma of 10% of your grapes and 10% of your wheat and 10%. Yeah, grains. Yeah, grains were heavy, but 10% of all your pomegranates, 10% of everything. You had to give 10%. Yes.
But they don't show that. They only show the meat and the bread.
So here, because pomegranates were not part of the rituals of the temple, the Temple Mount, that's where the space was dedicated to everything that you needed for the ritual. So, for example, I that was a good question. I think I answered it. Right?
Yeah. So they lived somewhere else. This was just the rituals for the temple.
Well, with a few exceptions. So, for example, we definitely know that there was a Kohen community immediately north of Jerusalem. There was a community called Nov, and that Nov is very famous because in the time of King David, Ahuva, you tell them. You're muted. You're muted.
Nov, remember that they were all killed? Anybody? Hello? Nov, remember? Stacy?
Yes, by Saul.
Oh, you were in Nov? You went
David.
there?
No, but we were in Ahuva's class where we talked about how Saul killed them when he was looking for David.
Right. So there is another Arab town, Arab Chas v'Shalom. There is another Kohen town immediately north of Jerusalem. By the way, north of Jerusalem, it's almost like a plateau. So it's called Anatot, and the Kohanim lived there. So they'd have to go up the hill and downhill. Remember how our parents used to complain, when I was your age, I used to walk to school 5 miles every morning, uphill, both ways, in the snow, even in August. So the whole idea is that the Kohanim, Anatot, was on the plateau of north of Jerusalem. It was approximately 6 or 7 miles maximum. It was a 2-hour walk, so to speak. So there were definite Kohen communities, but that was Anatot. There were a number of them. Here, answering your question, now you got to remember. So I'll just read this one because it's each family clan had the authority for the temple on their day of service. Boy, that was really poor English form sentence. These elders kept the keys to the temple court gates with them in this chamber. And you see here, that huge key, trust me, artistic rendering, artistic license. Within this chamber, a 1 square amah, that's about 18 inches square, opening on the floor, was covered with a marble slab. By pulling on its metal ring, it would be opened and attached by a chain with the gate, was the gates of the court, was the key to the gates of the court. Each evening upon completion of their service, the appointed elder locked the temple gates and returned the keys to its place, covers up the stone with his cloak, and sleeps on it on top of the spot so that the door could not be opened. So why do you think the Kohanim that were working that week had to sleep in the dormitory? Firefighters. No, it's a different reason. So the answer is, anyone?
Didn't to stay ritually pure, they weren't
That's
allowed
it.
to sleep with their wives.
That wouldn't well, there is a certain level of ritual purity, impurity, but all you have to do is go to a mikvah and then that night you're clean. But you could not take that chance of coming in contact with someone, who had touched a dead body or buried someone. You can't take that chance of, accidentally, uncovering a sheretz. A sheretz is a creepy crawly, either a mouse, a rat, a weasel, whatever it is that, you can't become ritually unclean because that would invalidate you for a week. Then you lose your whole week of work. So I have, I'll give you like a teaser about next week. Next week, I'm going to do a really quick perusal, and these are different renderings of this, what we've already studied. But next week, I'm going to tie it all in. What is the correlation between the Holy of Holies, the holy, and why is it relative to us today? So I hope you enjoyed class. Got any questions for me?
Next week, we have the movie.
Oh, yeah. You're going to have to wait 2 weeks for the answer. But that's all right, because we're going to still be doing the whole tour. I will give you a little. All right, you've been such good students. I think I should reward you. I'm going to show you next time we study how amazingly, remarkably in the text, Mount Sinai and the tabernacle are almost exactly word for word, allegorically similar. In the Hebrew, in the verse, obviously that's redundant, but more so in the explanation, in the perception, what was going on, what you could wear, who could go where. It's almost verse for verse. Mount Sinai and the tabernacle. All right, Chevra, have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you,
I hope
Rabbi.
you enjoyed class.
Night,
Oh,
Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Real quick, don't forget. Next Tuesday, I want a really great turnout. Everybody, free popcorn, free Coke. Maybe I'll provide ices. I don't know. What else do people eat? Twizzlers. Don't you like a good movie with Twizzlers? All right, I'm gonna get Twizzlers. My treat, Twizzlers.
Don't forget to call in for Friday to reserve.
Oh yeah, call in for Friday. Oh yes, listen. There's this.
Papa's birthday.
It's not. Don't worry about my birthday. But more importantly, we're bringing this guy who owns a vineyard, and it's his wine. Okay, we're drinking his wine. He's teaching us all about wine. It's a wine tasting. But I think there's 5 different types of wine. Maybe you should all Uber. Maybe you should Uber.
We're going to raise a glass to you in New York.
There you go. All right, 2 glasses. Okay, T. Two.
Okay.
Rabbi,
One red, one white.
Okay.
do we have class tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yes. God willing, we're gonna have class tomorrow. All right, Chevra. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Good night,
Night.
Lila Tov.
Lila, thank you.